What if the truth of cinema wasn't written in scripts but hidden in the frames that were never meant to survive? In Hollywood, the most powerful stories are not the ones projected onto the screen, but the ones carved out of it, reshaped by studio demands, quiet negotiations, and silent edits that few ever witness. Behind every blockbuster lies a version that almost existed, a version that fought to breathe, and a version that was buried before the lights came up. Across decades, from the chaotic rise of early franchises to the tightening grip of modern studios, entire worlds have been rebuilt in the cutting room. Films that once carried a raw vision were softened. Others were shattered and reassembled under new orders. Some were saved, some were lost, and some were transformed into something unrecognizable, a ghost of what the filmmakers intended. Tonight, we peel back that curtain. These are not stories of failure or success, but of collision between creativity and control, artistry and authority, truth and the version of truth that Hollywood prefers. And sometimes what vanishes from the screen reveals more than what remains. These are the 5 films that revealed what Hollywood tried to hide. Film 1, Tomb Raider. It begins with a paradox. A film built to create a global icon, yet reshaped so many times that even its own identity became a missing artifact. Tomb Raider arrived in 2001 carrying the weight of expectation, a franchise-ready adventure, a star-making role, and the hope of proving that a female-led action film could dominate worldwide markets. Angelina Jolie stepped into Lara Croft with a fierce physicality and an intensity that promised something darker, sharper, and more human than the glossy marketing suggested. Yet the version of the film that reached audiences was only a shadow of the one first envisioned. The surface story was glamorous, a blockbuster spectacle born from a video game legend, propelled by choreography, exotic locations, and the promise of a new action heroine. Trailers highlighted confidence, danger, and the invincibility of its lead. To the world, Tomb Raider looked like a bold, unwavering stamp of studio ambition. But behind the scenes, the truth was less clean. Paramount struggled with how powerful and gritty they wanted Lara to be. Early cuts were considered too intense, while some action sequences were softened to meet a PG-13 threshold. Script changes arrived daily. Character complexity was trimmed to speed up the plot. Several sequences Jolie trained months for were shortened, reshaped, or removed entirely when test screenings suggested audiences preferred spectacle over sincerity. In the process, conflict brewed between artistic vision and corporate caution, leaving behind the polished but diluted film that ultimately premiered. What remains is a reminder that even the strongest heroes can be molded by invisible hands. Lara Croft was built to break boundaries, but the version preserved on screen reflects a safer silhouette, one carved by committee, not by character. Film 2, The Wolfman, 2010. It is fitting that a film about transformation would be transformed most violently in the shadows of its own creation. The Wolfman began as a respectful revival of a universal classic, anchored by prestige talent and a promise of gothic elegance. Benicio del Toro stepped into the role with genuine reverence, embracing the tragedy and melancholy of a man hunted by the curse inside him. The early vision was slower, more atmospheric, built from dread instead of spectacle, a film that wanted to bleed fog and moonlight. On the surface, the promotional campaign sold something nearly operatic, a lavishly crafted period horror, dripping with style and anchored by emotional turmoil. Trailers promised artistry and brutality intertwined, a creature feature shaped by class and sorrow. To audiences, it looked like a film aware of its own legacy. But the truth inside the editing bays told a different story. The original director, Mark Romanek, departed early over studio disagreements, and Joe Johnston stepped in under suffocating deadlines. The film that emerged during production was not the one Universal wanted to release. Reshoots redefined motivations. Entire sequences were rebuilt. The score, originally brooding and atmospheric, was scrapped and replaced when executives feared it leaned too grim. CGI adjustments softened what practical effects once conveyed. The final cut, hurried and reconstructed, drifted far from the aching, character-driven tragedy that might have been. Yet within the film's fractured frame lies something strangely poetic. Its disjointedness mirrors the creature at its center, stitched between forms, torn between instincts, haunted by what it could not control. The Wolfman is both a movie and a message. Sometimes the real monster is the battle for authorship behind closed doors. Film 3, Rogue One. A Star Wars Story, 2016. Some films fight their battles on screen. Others fight them long before the cameras ever stop rolling. Rogue One. A Star Wars Story was born with the ambition of bridging myth and rebellion, a standalone tale that promised to reveal the price of hope. Gareth Edwards approached it with a documentarian's eye, a grittier war film set inside a universe usually painted in cleaner lines. The early cuts embraced exhaustion, sacrifice, moral blur, and the quiet terror of a mission meant to end in silence. The surface story shimmered with promise. Marketing presented a Star Wars film unlike any other. Grounded, brutal, shaped by desperation rather than destiny. The trailers became their own phenomenon, filled with haunting shots never before seen in the saga. Jyn facing a TIE fighter on a rooftop. Krennic striding through smoke, troopers wading through tropical firefights. It hinted at a film bold enough to stand alone, unafraid of shadows. But behind the frames was a storm few expected. Disney grew anxious that the tone was too somber, too weary, too final. Massive reshoots reshaped entire arcs. New scenes were added, others demolished. The ending, once bleaker, quieter, almost funereal, was rebuilt into something more immediate and explosive. Many trailer shots were casualties of the overhaul, glimpses of a film that no longer existed. Tony Gilroy stepped in to rework structure and dialogue, turning the original vision into a hybrid stitched from competing instincts. Realism versus franchise expectation, tragedy versus spectacle. The result is a film that carries two ghosts: the version that Edwards made, and the version the studio believed the audience needed. And somewhere between them lies the true story of Rogue One. A battle about what Star Wars could be, fought not in the stars, but in the edit. Film 4, The Island of Dr. Moreau, 1996. Some productions collapse quietly. Others descend into chaos so complete that the disaster becomes more iconic than the film itself. The Island of Dr. Moreau began as a surreal adaptation of H.G. Wells's tale of human-animal hybrids, but what emerged behind the camera was stranger, darker, and more uncontrollable than anything written in the novel. It was supposed to be a psychological horror wrapped in philosophical questions. Instead, it became a battlefield where ego, exhaustion, and unraveling tempers dictated the story more than any script ever could. On the surface, it was marketed as an eccentric science fiction thriller carried by two Hollywood titans, Marlon Brando, enigmatic and unpredictable, and Val Kilmer, a rising star with magnetic presence. Posters promised spectacle and mutation, a fever dream of creatures and ethical dread. The public expected a bizarre but contained descent into madness. The truth was far wilder. Original director Richard Stanley, known for unconventional ideas, found himself at odds with studio expectations almost immediately. Tension escalated until he was abruptly removed, a decision that sent shockwaves through the cast and crew. John Frankenheimer replaced him, but the production spiraled further. Feuding actors, rewrites appearing daily, scenes reshaped under pressure, and Brando arriving in unpredictable costumes and improvising entire sequences. Kilmer clashed with nearly everyone, further eroding stability. In one of the most unbelievable turns, Stanley, the director fired from his own film, secretly returned to set disguised in a full creature suit, wandering through scenes of the movie he no longer controlled. What emerged in theaters was a mosaic of clashing visions, a film stitched together from fragments of intention and disorder. It exists as both a movie and a monument to creative implosion, proof that sometimes the real story mutates long before the cameras start rolling. Film 5, Superman 2, 1980. Few films in Hollywood history have lived two separate lives as dramatically as Superman 2. What audiences saw in 1980 was a triumphant sequel, brighter and more comedic than its predecessor, carried by Christopher Reeve's unmistakable sincerity. But beneath that polished exterior lay a creative fracture, a split between two visions, two directors, and two ideologies about what a superhero should be. The film became a battleground where the power of authorship collided with the power of the studio, leaving behind not one story but two. The surface version was familiar, almost comfortable. Promotional campaigns highlighted spectacle, romantic tension, and heroic grandeur. It felt like the natural continuation of the first film, lighter, faster, eager to please. Richard Lester's influence reshaped tone and pacing, leaning toward humor and briskness. Audiences embraced it for years, believing it to be the definitive version of Superman's next chapter. But the truth, long concealed, was that Richard Donner, the director who shaped the soul of the first film, had already shot most of Superman 2 before being abruptly removed. Creative disagreements with producers grew until they overshadowed progress, and Lester was brought in to retool what Donner had built. Scenes were rewritten, reshot, or replaced entirely. Emotional arcs Donner intended as grounded and mythic were softened. Key sequences, including Marlon Brando's presence as Jor-El, were discarded for budget and credit disputes. The film that reached theaters was only a partial reflection of the one originally envisioned. Decades later, the emergence of the Donner cut revealed a parallel world, a darker, more operatic, more character-driven film that had been hidden in the vaults. It didn't erase the theatrical version, but illuminated the divide between intention and execution. In its dual existence, Superman 2 stands as a reminder that even icons can be rewritten, and that sometimes the most revealing version of truth is the one we were never allowed to see. Bonus fact: The Fantastic Four, 1994. Some films vanish not because they failed, but because they were never meant to live. The 1994 version of The Fantastic Four is one of Hollywood's strangest secrets, a complete feature film created with every intention except release. It was shot quickly, inexpensively, and with a cast that believed they were about to become part of comic book history. Instead, they unknowingly stepped into a production built on a legal technicality, a phantom project designed only to keep the rights from expiring. On the surface, it looked earnest. Promotional photos were taken. Costumes were fitted. Actors rehearsed scenes with the kind of hopeful energy that comes from believing they are at the beginning of something. Even a trailer was cut and distributed at conventions, stirring real excitement among fans. To the outside world, it looked like a sincere, if modest, attempt to bring Marvel's first family to life. But behind the scenes, a truth unfolded that no one on set had been told. The studio never intended the film to see daylight. It needed to exist on paper and on camera, but not in theaters. When production wrapped, the cast waited for a premiere that never came. The film disappeared into storage, its creators learning the truth only years later through rumor and industry whispers. Their work had been sacrificed to a contractual loophole, preserved only insofar as it fulfilled a requirement. The 1994 Fantastic Four became a ghost, a completed film buried not for its quality, but for its purpose. It stands as a reminder that sometimes cinema's greatest mystery is not how a film is made, but why it was never allowed to be seen. Some films fail on screen, others were never even allowed to fail. Across these 5 films runs a single hidden thread: the tension between the story told and the story controlled. Each production carried its own ambitions, its own struggles, its own vision of what cinema could be. Yet what ultimately reached audiences was shaped not only by directors and performers, but by the silent weight of decisions made in rooms far from the camera's gaze. In their fractures, we see more than chaos. We see the fragile balance between freedom and oversight, between the artist's voice and the studio's hand. These films remind us that truth in cinema is rarely straightforward. It flickers between drafts, disappears in editing suites, shifts with every reshoot and renegotiation. What survives on screen is only one version of what might have been a version crafted by compromise, by fear, by ambition, or by belief. And sometimes the most revealing stories are the ones audiences were never meant to witness. In cinema, every reel hides a reality, and every cut hides a confession. The 5 films we explored offer more than behind-the-scenes intrigue. They echo the deeper question of who decides what the world gets to see. When a film changes shape in secret, is it still the same story? Or is it a mirror of the forces shaping it? Which of these films do you think revealed too much, and which one deserved to be seen uncensored? Real secrets, where the truth was always in the edit.